Hey folks, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you a little bit about Windows Server 2012 and adding the role of HyperV, or Microsoft's version of virtualization. Now what should be in this Server 2012 version of HyperV should be HyperV 3.0. So it's supposed to do a number of things, like have better support for more processors, more RAM, all kinds of other good and happy things. So what I'm going to go ahead and do it here is I'm going to take you through the whole process. I've got my server manager up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a role. Here we go. Click next, yes. Next. Yeah, this one, okay. Okay. Let's see. Lots of things are not checked, but we're going to check one. HyperV, there we go. With this and GUI management, vmount, okay, that's what we want. So we're going to have HyperV installed. Click next, and next again, and read all the scary text. Here's the most interesting part. See this virtual machines require virtual switches communicate? On this particular server hardware, I actually have an additional adapter installed. One of them is the adapter I'm actually using to speak to it now. The other one is specifically there to function as the virtual switch for HyperV. And I'm actually going to assign that role to this Realtek adapter here. So put it there. And this will be the virtual switch that all of my virtual machines will use to speak to the rest of the network. So, and pretty much, well, to each other, because they need something in the IP stack to be able to communicate between each other, but to communicate out to the real world, they'll need it as well. So, this is probably the most thought you'll have to do when adding the role of HyperV on a Server 2012 box. So, we've picked that, so we're going to move on to next. Okay. And we see for migration. And it says, yeah, you could do this and that. And there's the admonitions about if it's part of a cluster, don't enable it. So I'm going to go ahead and let's try that. Use credential security, that'll be fine. Next. And now it's going to ask us about where we want to put our virtual hard disks and where the configuration files go. This is fine. We could change if we wanted to, especially if we had a SAN attached, which chances are you'd be doing if on a production server. You'd probably have a SAN attached to the server somehow. Okay, restart destination. Well, we won't restart automatically because we don't want to get cut off mid-sentence. Anyway, we've got everything we need here, so let's go ahead and do the install. And here it goes. And we're back, and it looks like we're through with getting the feature installed. Looks like everything's happy here. Probably going to need a restart, so we'll close this out. And we'll look at the notification here. Okay. Good. Alright, so we're going to let it go ahead and let it do its refresh. Go to Settings, Power. We'll click this and restart. This. Okay, we're back, and we've got the server restarted and all that good stuff going on. So now we're looking at the server manager and the dashboard, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to HyperV. We're going to go to the command console here. It's been installed since we have the role in now, and we'll just kind of give a quick overview here. You're going to see whatever servers you're in HyperV that you can see on your network. We're going to show up here, and you can manage them from here. You right-click menu, and computer management, HyperV manager is what we're really going to be worried about. But if we scroll down, we can actually see the status. We can see what the event logs specific to HyperV are showing us. We can see the services, of course. We see they're running. Best practice analyzer, yeah, whatever. We've been doing some running on here, so you can actually see there's some performance data here. That's kind of interesting. So you can see how much memory we're using, CPU, and that kind of thing. So kind of a nice, quick little point-in-time view. And of course the roles that are installed on the server, and if there are more, there'll be more down here. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at HyperV, the real management of it. Okay, so we're looking at HyperV Manager, and what we're going to do here is let's do probably the most basic thing that you ever consider doing, which is let's just make a new virtual machine. So let's get going. So here you see we've already got one made here, but we want to make a new one. Well, go to server, and you can either do the right click on the server here and do new virtual machine, or you do it over here, pretty much the same thing. Just click new virtual machine, and it starts the new virtual machine wizard. Say, okay, that's great. Next. Let's call this test virtual. All right. Next again. Now, I'll actually refer you to that. Notice if I click this, I can actually put it in a different location than the default directory, which is the Windows Hyper-V under Program Data in Microsoft, which is actually a hidden directory. But we're not going to do that. We're going to leave it in the default location for now. Click Next. Now, startup memory. This is the base amount of memory that the VM will have available to it. Which means if we wanted more memory, if we wanted 2, 4, 8 gig, depending on what we had, we could put it in there. We put that. Right now the default is half a gig. This little checkbox, dynamic memory, it's kind of neat. What it does is it'll start with this, but if the VM seems to need more memory than that, it'll allocate it. So up to however much you have in the machine. So we have that. Click Next. Connection. This is the networking connection. Now, for the most simple, we're going to just use the virtual switch, which will let us get connectivity to the outside world from our VM. Everything flows through that virtual switch adapter that we set up when we were setting up the role for Hyper-V. So, and that will show up as a network connection in your VM, and you'll be able to use it. Click Next. Now, we're going to create a new virtual hard disk. And this is flowing from the main virtual disk, or the main reservation that's been made for Hyper-V. It's actually kind of dynamic. So I'm going to set a number here of just say 20 gigabytes. And from that it will flow. It'll be at least that big, or should be that big, but it might use less. It might use more. But it'll be at least 20 gig. So that's if we make a new hard disk. Now, if we want to use an existing, if we find one somewhere else, we can just browse for it. And anywhere on our network or on our local machine, we can find a disk to use and choose that one instead. Or we can just choose to do that later. So it'll basically be creating a VM without any disk configured for it. The default is just to create a new one, though. So we'll do that next. Here's our choices for operating system. We can either just not do it and just make the generic blank VM now, or we can install it from media. If we have a physical CD drive available, then they would use that, or an ISO file, again, somewhere on your local machine, or if you have one sitting out there somewhere, you can use that. Close that for now. A boot floppy, which that's basically a floppy disk. Very old operating system. Or we can go to the network, which means it'll set up whatever protocols it needs to go out to the network and find the operating system location. In fact, let's see what happens when we click Next with that. Okay. So, yep, will be installed from network. Actually, we're going to go ahead and go back. We'll just do operating system later because I don't want to get us into anything that's too advanced. Okay, this is pretty much it. We've got the name of it, how much memory it's going to have at the minimum available to it. what network connection it currently is going to be using, where its hard disk is going to be stored, and what we're going to do for installing an operating system. We click Finish. It's going to create it. And there we are. We have our new virtual machine showing up. Now, of course, we have to install an operating system, but we can tweak the settings as well. And as you've seen, it's the same as when you do an existing. All the same settings are here. So anyway, that's the most basic thing you're going to do in HyperV, aside from installing it, is to just set up a brand new virtual machine. So we're doomed. No, we're not doomed. Okay, so onward and upward. And you can see I've got a couple of virtual machines up here. The basic layout is the virtual machines here. Snapshots, yes, just like VMware. If you take a snapshot, it'll show up here and you'll see it in a tree view. In fact, I'll go ahead and do that in a minute here, just so you can see the virtual machine snapshot get created. Down here, kind of a status window for the virtual machines, and it changes with whatever one you're looking at the time. So, say Server 03 would show, or Windows 7, whatever. And when it's running, which we're going to go ahead and start one here, you'll actually see some updates here, kind of the server health. Summary is a little bit of everything. Memory would show you how much memory is using. Of course, we've configured it for 2 gig, but it's not assigned, no status, because it's not running. Networking, when that's up, it'll show you what's going on with the adapter. The virtual switch, which remember we set that up to be on that Realtek adapter. Because we have 2 physical adapters in the machine. That one is going to handle all the communication for the VMs to actually be able to talk to the rest of the world instead of just in their own little sandbox here. And then replication. Now we're not going to do much with replication. You actually need another separate physical server for replication. And what that is it's not really vMotion. What it really is more akin to more of a clustering, or like even closer, more of like Active Directory replication, where you're basically replicating AD database all over the place to a bunch of different domain controllers. That's really more of the model here. But it would be a actual secondary kind of failover copy should something happen. So that's kind of neat. Maybe like a combination of AD replication and clustering. You could think of it that way. Important thing to note too, you saw when we were installing, there was a note about clustering. They really want you to have the cluster in place and all that first before you do any kind of HyperV installation, just so everything kind of gels. Doing it before then will kind of mess things up. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and start this VM, the Server 03 here. I don't want to rename it, I just want to start it. So I'm going to right click it, and we got a little context menu. We could start it from here. Or, if you notice the panes here, there's the server pane. Here's the actions pane, which the top one will always be the current server you're working on and all the settings for it. The bottom part of this column will be currently the active VM that you're playing with. So this is Server 03 because that's highlighted. If I click 7, see it changes to 7. So and let's go ahead and start this, and we'll just go ahead and I can do it from the context menu here, or I can go down into the Server 03 here. See, I can fold it up and display it out here. We'll go ahead and start it. And you can see it starting, it's running, and when that happens, you see the window changes. This is kind of like a little status window. You can kind of see what's going on real time, and if you actually double click this, you see it actually opens up to a little window you can work a little better with. And the same controls. You can send the control Alt-Delete, which I'll do to get it started, after it's done starting up, of course. And yeah, because if you do a control Alt-Delete, of course, on this console, it's going to go right to the task manager, shutdown screen. So it captures that and basically, lets the VM work like you actually hit control Alt-Delete. Here's your power button, turn off, shut down. Just like VMware, there are tools that have to be installed to make sure, like, you notice how easily my mouse cursor moves from in and out. If I didn't have the integration package installed here, I would have to do a Control Alt left arrow to actually get out of this window. I'd be trapped. Other things, it actually will let the virtual adapters, like some of the virtual, like a virtual SAN adapter, a virtual ID, a virtual network, graphics, all that kind of stuff. Just like VMware, it'll let that stuff actually pass through and actually work, and it'll make the VM work a little better. It'll be a little happier in its environment. But you can't do that till you actually install the operating system. So know that it's not something you can really roll in. And part of that is kind of neat. It's gives you the capability. You see this button here to shut down, which if you watch this, I'm actually going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to shut it down just by pushing this button. And of course, there's the thing. Yes, shut down. Okay, it failed to. Okay, probably because I wasn't logged in. Go ahead and log it in. Okay, and there we see our nice little desktop here. Admonition about desktop settings. We should, let's see if we can. Now, it's probably not going to let us, but we could get a bigger view of this. We could actually go full screen. Let's see here. There we go. Now we're full screen. Of course, we're in such low resolution that it looks kind of ridiculous. Just go ahead and get out of this. Okay, we can get out of that. It puts a little bar on the screen, and you basically minimize it like you would any other. Very similar to remote desktop. In fact, we're going to go ahead and close this view down. It's still running. You can see the status of it here in the window. In fact, kind of neat little thing. If you go to the desktop, and we're going to hit the Windows key here, you see that we have tiles now for Hyper-V. Sort of control it, so we could actually, if we didn't have it started, we could do Hyper-V Manager. But the virtual machine connection is just like the RDP connection or the remote desktop connection. If we click that, you see, okay, what server? Well, the one we're currently on is fine. And pick our virtual machine, and boom, see, there's another way to open that. So, kind of a neat little feature. But now let's see if we can make our shutdown work. We're going to do a shutdown. Click the button here. And there you go, because we weren't logged in. But now it's shutting down. Yeah, you are going to be restricted to whatever the operating system allows. So, and there we go. We've actually turned it off and shut down the virtual machine. And all we have to do is one click. No funny keystrokes or click, click, click around the VM. Just hit a button. Now that it's off, we can look at some of the settings for it. And the settings are right down here, or we can also right click and look at the settings here. Either way, we'll open up, click that. Now, because it's off, this is when we can really play around with the settings. If there was hardware we wanted to add that wasn't in there, add hardware. Just click here. BIOS. We can change stuff like turning on the numlock. That's important. What's the boot order? Now, that's one thing. The BIOS options are a little bit light compared to VMware, but okay. And I don't know about like in VMware Workstation or doing a custom BIOS install or anything like that. I haven't seen that option. Memory, we can configure. We've got it configured here for 2 gig. Dynamic memory, that's kind of neat. In fact, I'm going to put that checkbox on. And you see it has a minimum and a maximum. Well, I'm going to set that maximum to the 2048 at the top here. And we'll just backspace that out. Okay, so we've done that. Now, if this thing was running, you wouldn't be able to change these values, obviously, because you wouldn't look at it this way. If you had a physical machine, you wouldn't be yanking out and slamming in RAM sticks if it was running. So, same thing here. Maybe you could do that on a server, but in a VM, it's not going to think it's too cool. So, buffer is basically a memory reserve buffer. So, yeah, whatever. Memory weight. What this does is, if you had a number of VMs in here, what this does is basically set the priority, because you're still dealing with a shared amount of physical memory. In fact, you could actually over-allocate memory and bring the whole server to a crawl, which, of course, wouldn't be a good thing. Well, in this way, if you had multiple VMs, you could actually set who gets the memory first by adjusting the slider bar. By default, it's in the middle. Processor. You give it 1, 2, 9 processors, whatever. Again, that's the number of threads. It's kind of an abstract, but generally for most older server OS and stuff, unless you're really running something like Exchange or SQL Server, I'd probably keep that to 2 or less. Most servers don't need the extra processing power, especially if it's like a file server or something like that. IDE controller. This is generally going to be what the local controller is going to be showing. So, and it really does. It falls under the. It kind of falls under the SCSI controller, but these are virtualized versions of your physical. So remember that when we did the hard drive, we allocated space. We basically made a big disk file, and we're playing with that disk file. And where does that thing actually physically live is IDE controller 0, which is basically goes back to the SATA controller on this particular physical box. The secondary controller, it's got the DVD, and you see that we can change what controller that lives on. Just by clicking down here, we can put it on 0 if we wanted to. We can make the CD actually just point to an image file. And right now, it's this VM guest ISO. This is actually the CD image that contains the HyperV acceleration tools that we were looking at the beginning of this. And then if we had one available here, we could also actually assign this to a real physical CD drive. So say you've got something on media and you don't have an ISO or access to the ISO. Unlike VMware, we can pull an image file from anywhere. It doesn't have to be, VMware has this thing called the data store, where everything has to be uploaded to the data store. This is a local directory. You do a browse, I'm looking at my C drive here. I'm not looking at an abstraction of my file system. So that's kind of a nice little feature, makes it a little easier. But if we didn't have that and didn't have an ISO somewhere, we could actually attach it to a physical CD that was on the system. So, or we can remove this entirely and not have a CD drive show up on the system. So it's enough about that. Network adapter. Okay. So the virtual switch, remember, that's the representation to the virtual machines of the physical adapter we actually assign to this. And a virtual identification, yeah, you could actually set up VLANs within the vSwitch on your host, which is kind of neat. Now, I'm not sure with replication or multiple servers how that's going to translate. If the VLANs are going to cross, across hosts, where could you have something in, say, VLAN 3 on 3 different hosts, and they all see each other, but they don't see anything on the other VLANs? I don't know. I would think that would be the case, but I can't verify that at this time. That's for somebody with a lot more letters behind their name, starting with M. Anyway, bandwidth management. Yeah, if we don't want this thing to be hogging all the network bandwidth, we could set that here. I usually leave it alone because I rarely have a need to do that. Or we could take it out entirely. See, remove here. Then we have virtual COM ports. So, if you feel the need for those. Now, interesting, I've not seen anything that could actually remove these devices, but since they have no attachment, they're probably not going to be using any resources, just like the virtual floppy drive. And that's pretty much it for the hardware. Below it, we have the management, which is where we set the name of the VM, which this one happens to be Server 2003. Integration services, that's that VM guest ISO that was installed. The operating system, this, like here, operating system shutdown. This is enabled and actually put hooks into the OS in the VM that let me push that button to shut down the system without having to go through a bunch of stuff in the VM itself. Time synchronization between the VM and usually the host. Data exchange, more like copy and paste kind of stuff and that kind of thing. Heartbeat is what's giving us the information down here. What's going on with memory and networking and all that stuff. That's pretty much a status kind of thing. Let's get back into it. So, oh, I lost my settings. Where'd they go? There they go. And back up the volume snapshot, which, yeah, you can't, without the tools installed, you're not going to get a snapshot of the VM. So it behooves you to really get these tools. Plus, it enhances the video. It makes the mouse not jittery, moves around a lot more smoothly. So really, though, you shouldn't be managing this thing. I mean, I know I showed you the little desktop and double-clicking open that. You really, unless it's a, you know, you can't get to it from the network or something, you really should be managing it either with the server tools or the VMware, the remotes, the RSAT, the remote server administration tools, or whatever Hyper-V management you have, say, in Windows 8. You really should be managing it from that or a remote desktop session. Again, Microsoft really doesn't want you to be doing much on the desktop, and they've made it kind of a pain in the butt to do it if you decide to go that route, but that's just something you should know. Snapshot, you could change where your snapshots go. If you don't want it here or you want it on a network share or something like that, you could share that here just by browsing. Same with the smart paging file. Automatic start and stop, basically what do you want the thing to do? Say when the machine starts up, do I want the VM to start automatically with it? Well, right here the default is if it was running when the service stopped, then go ahead and start it. Or you can always start it or not start it. And stop is just the inverse. You know, if you go to shut down a machine and didn't remember to turn off your VMs, okay, what do you want it to do? Save the state, turn it off, or just shut down the guest operating system? Actually, that should probably shut down, because shut down effectively turns off the VM. So, and go ahead and we'll apply that. So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and start this VM. Just going to do that here. While that's happening, we see that we say we're using 2%, mostly because it's starting. We can see we're actually getting something from memory now. You see we have some numbers in here. Assign 2048 startup, minimum, maximum. The networking, it's still starting, so we don't have anything yet, but it knows the adapter's there. And of course, nothing's going to happen with replication because that's not enabled on this particular Hyper-V machine. Okay, well, that thing is basically starting up, and we can kind of see what's going on in the window here. Yeah, it's still going. Remember, we can just double-click this, and we can see what's happening. I'll go ahead and shut that down because I don't need to see that. There we go. See, there's our IP address. And that came straight from a DHCP server. Oh, that is not this machine. In fact, this machine has no DHCP server installed. There's no role for that on this machine. So that is coming from outside. That tells you right off the bat that the virtual machine thinks it's a physical machine and it thinks it's on the same network. So let's look at some of the Hyper-V settings real quick for the server itself. Here we could see where does the virtual hard disk files go? Where do the virtual machines live? Physical GPUs. If we had more than one GPU, we could actually assign it as a separate GPU for what Hyper-V calls remote FX, which is supposed to enable a degree of 3D acceleration within the VMs, which could be handy, like, you know, I guess if you were running Windows 7 and really wanted to see Arrow in a VM, you could do that. NUMA spanning. That one's kind of a head scratcher. It's kind of memory sharing, basically. Live migrations. Okay. Basically, this is like vMotion. So if you had replication, if you had another server, you could actually basically move the virtual machine while it was still running and not mess with anybody's day because you'd have to shut down their server. Storage migrations, yeah, okay. And replication, and it enabled this computer's replica server. So if I made another server with Hyper-V, it would actually see this server and say, oh, I can replicate to you. Okay, neat. And we could set how it does it. I have Kerberos here, or you could do certificate. And there I have it unauthenticated, or I could specify servers if I didn't want every Hyper-V enabled server in the organization to get there. Then keyboard, where what happens with the keyboard and the mouse, and of course reset everything to defaults if I wanted to. That's basic settings for HyperV. Virtual Switch Manager. We actually configured this when we set up HyperV. We can actually look at some virtual switch settings. We just go ahead and open that little X. See, there's extensions, and this basically tells us, okay, what kind of basically layer 2 protocols we have running in layer 1 protocol, merely layer 2. Virtual switch, and we can see that it's external, not internal, or private. So think of private like DMZ. And this is actually allowing, this actually would let some packets flow through this adapter that are coming from here and not HyperV. So actually coming from the server itself. And of course we've picked the Realtek as the adapter that we've dedicated to the virtual switch. MAC address range. There you go. I mean, so that's all very configurable, very similar. Maybe a little simplistic compared to VMware. Virtual SAN Manager. Here's where we'd set up if we actually had a SAN to connect to. This is where we'd be setting up all the settings for HyperV to make use of it. We actually have some IPv6 stuff in there too, some IPv6 addressing. Edit disk. First we have to locate it. And basically if we want to change settings on the disk or where it was or how big it was, that's where we do it. Inspect disk. Okay, so we could actually inspect the disks that are assigned to the virtual machines. So, and of course then you have to stop service, remove server, that kind of stuff, which, well, if you're running into, chances are you're not going to be removing it. And you got the view. We just changed this whole view around here. So that's kind of a quick run through of the HyperV interface. You've got the server pane here, basically the virtual machine panes here, which shows you some information, and then the actions menu, which is basically, you know, the right-click menu is a little prettier form for both the server itself and whatever virtual machine is active. So, okay, that's gonna take care of it for this video, for this part 1 video of HyperV. We'll do the final part to part 2, which will go a little bit more into the actual exporting of a virtual machine or some other stuff like that. Nothing hard. So anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in a few.